August 12, 1962, South Vietnam. The morning sky hums with the sound of engines. Two silver C-123 aircraft glide low over the jungle, their bellies opening like wounds. A mist begins to fall soft, yellow, and silent. What looked like rain was Agent Orange, a chemical weapon disguised as herbicide. Over 9 years, aircraft released 20 million gallons across Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, targeting forests that hid the Viet Cong. But the spray didn't stop at the trees. It sank into rivers, soil, and flesh. The chemical carried dioxin, one of the deadliest toxins ever made. It burned skin, destroyed crops, and seeped into bloodlines. Thousands were poisoned. Children were born deformed decades later, victims of a war they never lived through. Today, the land still remembers. In Bien Hoa, soil samples remain 100 times more toxic than safe limits. The forests have grown back, but the people and their genes still bear the scars. The sky once rained poison, and its echoes still breathe in the earth below. But the truth goes deeper. Watch the full story on Ghost of War. August 12, 1962, southwestern Vietnam. The dawn was wrapped in mist. Dew still clung to banana leaves, rice shoots, and thatched roofs, glimmering faintly in the weak morning light. The air hummed with the familiar sounds of frogs, crickets, and wind rustling through the paddies, a peaceful morning like any other. Then, from far away, that sound changed. A deep, rumbling growl rolled across the horizon, not thunder, not a tractor, but the low pulse of jet engines drawing near, heads tilted upward. Against the pale sky, two silver dots grew larger, side by side, C-123 Provider aircraft, bellies swollen, glinting in the sun. Beneath their wings hung long metal pipes that caught the light like blades. The planes flew low, dangerously low, just a few hundred feet above the ground. As they passed over the rice fields, a pale mist began to spread behind them, thin, almost beautiful at first glance. But it wasn't smoke. It was a yellowish liquid, falling gently like rain, blanketing trees, crops, ponds, and people. For a brief moment, villagers thought it was mosquito repellent. Then came the smell, sharp, metallic, and oily, stinging the nose and throat. It clung to skin, burned lightly. Children screamed. Adults coughed, pulling shirts over their mouths. But it was already too late. The droplets had landed on hair, on clothes, on bare flesh, and began to seep in. From the cockpit, Captain John C. Brown of the U.S. Air Force's 12th Air Commando Squadron watched through the haze. He saw no faces below, only faint shadows moving through the green. In his mission log, the entry would read simply, Ranch Hand Mission Nuthar 01, Defoliation Test Zone, South Vietnam. No mention of villages, no mention of civilians, only one directive: spray and return. That was the first day of Operation Ranch Hand, the beginning of the largest chemical warfare campaign in human history. In the weeks that followed, the flights continued. Every day, dozens of C-123 aircraft lifted off from Bien Hoa and Ja Nang air bases, their tanks filled with the chemical mixture known as Agent Orange, produced by Dow Chemical and Monsanto. Each drum bore an orange stripe, the mark of a compound made from 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T, contaminated with a lethal byproduct dioxin, TCDD. When released over the jungles of South Vietnam, it was meant to expose enemy trails and destroy food supplies. No one who mattered spoke of what it did to the land, the rivers, and the people. At first, the villagers noticed only the yellowing leaves. Then the fruit trees began to die, The ponds turned murky, and the rice fields failed. After a few days came the sickness rashes, open sores, falling hair, sleepless nights, endless coughing. Newborns appeared with strange deformities, swollen heads, twisted limbs, curved spines. Some believed it was a curse from the heavens. But the truth was simpler. The heavens had been poisoned. In Washington, Pentagon briefings called the mission a success. Defoliation rate 95%. Mission efficiency high. No U.S. casualties. No one spoke of civilian deaths. No one listed the names of the villages buried under the chemical fog. Only sterile numbers remained: 20 million gallons sprayed over 20,000 square kilometers of land. Meanwhile, in Saigon, U.S. medical officers began to notice unusual symptoms among their own troops: red rashes, yellow eyes, enlarged livers, insomnia. But the official reply from command was always the same: no conclusive evidence linking symptoms to herbicide exposure. Continue operations. One night in 1964, heavy rain fell over Phu Loi. Mud from the hills washed down through the village, carrying a strange, oily sheen. The Lay family, 5 people, drank from their well as usual. 3 months later, their youngest daughter, Tui, 2 years old, began coughing blood and died within days. Doctors called it pneumonia, but soon, other children in nearby villages began dying with the same symptoms. No one knew that beneath the soil they tilled, dioxin had already sunk deep, where it would remain for decades. No one heard the scream of chemicals, only silence, the silence of dying forests, of polluted rivers, and of bodies slowly decaying without reason. At a meeting in Saigon, Colonel James H. Herbert, scientific advisor to the U.S. Air Force, signed a classified report to the Pentagon. Operation Ranch Hand continues to achieve desirable defoliation results. The use of agents orange, white, and blue shows promise for long-term environmental control. Few ever saw the handwritten note by a chemical engineer at the bottom. Potential toxicity for humans unknown. On the ground, the planes kept flying, and on the ground, life began to rot. March 1965, Eastern South Vietnam. The morning light no longer shone clear. Sunlight filtered weakly through skeletal tree trunks, tracing brittle shadows on the cracked soil. Where once dense canopies roared with the calls of gibbons and birds, there now stood only charred stumps, black pillars rising from mud. No insects buzzed, no monkeys cried. The air hung heavy, metallic, with a faint acidic tang that stung the nose like burnt wires. Even the dew was strange now. It wasn't clear like water, but viscous, oily, leaving a cold film on skin. Beneath the blackened roots, snakes, frogs, and birds had died in layers, their bodies dissolving into a thin membrane. The earth was silent. Only poison vapor rose when the sun touched the ground. At a field research station inside Bien Hoa Air Base, Major Carl M. Nelson, a U.S. Air Force chemist, leaned over a map littered with red dots spreading along the Vietnam-Cambodia-Laos border. He wrote in his logbook, "The effects of Agent Orange exceed expectations. Full defoliation achieved within 2 weeks. No remaining canopy cover." He paused, then added a smaller note. "Nearby water sources discolored. Fish die-offs observed. Recommend toxicity testing." That report was never sent. The next day, Nelson was reassigned to Hawaii for administrative reasons. In the jungles of the South, Viet Cong units who once lived beneath the shade of thick trees now hid underground. They called the chemical rain the Orange Rain. When they heard the distant drone of C-123s, they dove into tunnels, wrapping banana leaves around their heads, waiting for the stench to fade. But even underground, The poison crept through the air, through the wells, through every open wound. A field nurse named Nguyen Thi Tam wrote in her 1966 diary, after every spraying, more people fall sick. Their skin blisters. Some faint. I cough constantly now. My chest burns. There is no medicine. Only the hope that the wind changes. The notebook was later found in a collapsed bunker near Ben Cat. The last line stopped mid-sentence. If I don't wake up tomorrow. Meanwhile, in Midland, Michigan, Dow Chemical executives met with Pentagon officials behind closed doors. On the table sat sealed glass samples of 2,4,5-T, the core ingredient of Agent Orange. A young engineer, Frank Boren, who had worked on the first production batch, spoke nervously. The dioxin byproduct TCDD causes birth defects in lab animals. We can't eliminate it completely during synthesis. A government contractor replied flatly, "We're at war. Costs can't rise because of an unverified risk." The meeting ended in silence. The contracts stayed intact. The shipments continued. In Vietnam's Central Highlands, rubber and coffee plantations withered. Trees stopped flowering. During the monsoon, red soil washed down the hills into rivers and streams. Villagers kept drinking that water. They didn't know that every sip contained toxins thousands of times beyond safety limits. In a hamlet near Khe Sanh, a newborn survived only 7 days. His mother, just 24, stared at him, his skull misshapen, no eyes, chest fused to his shoulder. She screamed until her voice broke, then buried him beneath a mango tree, a tree that itself withered months later. In the years that followed, the poisoned zone spread like a disease. The Mekong Delta, the Central Highlands, the Ho Chi Minh Trail, Cambodia, Laos. According to declassified files, in 1967 alone, over 4.5 million gallons of Agent Orange were released, nearly 17 million liters of toxin. The American pilots called it flying the devil's mission. Some began to dream of burning forests and charred bodies, though they had never set foot on the ground. At Phu Cat Air Base in 1968, Lieutenant Robert H. Kennedy returned from his final mission. Looking down at the plains below, where orange mist still clung to the dying treetops, he turned to his co-pilot and said quietly, "We're not just killing the jungle. We're killing the land itself." No one replied. His words dissolved into the roar of the engines, swallowed by another wave of chemical rain falling from the sky. For nearly a decade, the skies over Vietnam were no longer blue. They carried only the orange hue of death, drifting silently through the air, settling into soil, into rivers, into bloodlines. 1971 Saigon. Operation Ranch hand officially ended. The last C-123s touched down without ceremony, their tanks empty, their wings dull with residue. But the war they had started, the invisible one, continued to rage inside bodies, wombs, and the unborn. In the maternity ward of Tu Du Hospital, obstetrician Dr. Nguyen Thi Thap stood frozen beside the delivery table. The baby just pulled from its mother's womb. A boy had no eyes, an open skull, a left arm fused to its chest, and legs bent backward. The mother took one look and fainted. The room fell into silence. Only the ceiling fan hummed, slow and relentless. Dr. Thap wrote in her report, "Congenital deformity, likely chemical exposure." The record was later buried among forgotten files. But that night, she couldn't sleep. In her mind, the baby's cry echoed faint, broken, then gone. Years later, when asked about it, she said only, "You never forget the cry of a child who wasn't meant to live." In Quang Nguyen province, a man named Vo Juk Long carried his paralyzed son on his back. The boy, 8 years old, had a head twice normal size, cloudy eyes, and no speech, Long said. When the planes sprayed, we thought it was just for weeds. Now the soil won't grow anything. My son was born like this. The doctors said there's poison in his blood. He walked through the fields where he once planted rice, now nothing but red earth and brittle stumps. When the wind blew, dust lifted and clung to their clothes and hair. In that dust was dioxin, invisible, odorless, but more persistent than time itself. In the United States, that same year, veterans returning from Vietnam began to protest. They carried photographs, jungles stripped bare, blackened villages, children twisted by deformity. Among them was Chuck Searcy, a former soldier stationed in central Vietnam in 1968. He spoke to reporters who, "We didn't know what we were dropping. They told us it was just herbicide. But now some of us have kids like those, deformed, sick. The poison's in our blood too. We're guilty. All of us." American newspapers ran their first stories on Agent Orange. The images of eyeless infants and Vietnamese mothers holding them in silence shocked the world. Yet in Congress, a senator stated coolly, "There's no conclusive scientific link. Malnutrition or genetic disease may be to blame." And with that sentence, silence fell again for years. 1973, the war ended, but the poison remained. Soviet and Polish scientists examined the affected regions, confirming that dioxin contamination was thousands of times above safe limits. They collected soil, fish, water, and human hair. Every sample was toxic. One researcher whispered, "We're not just witnessing chemical pollution. This is genetic inheritance of suffering. It will follow mankind for generations." During the 1980s, in the hamlet of Mai Chan, a new generation of children was born with faces unlike any seen before. One without a nose, one without eyes, one without arms or legs. Their parents still worked the same poisoned land, drank from the same wells, and breathed the same dust. No one helped, no one measured. They simply wrapped their children in blankets and placed them by windows for air that was also tainted. Across the Pacific, in 1984, after years of lawsuits, Dow Chemical and Monsanto agreed to pay $180 million to U.S. veterans. Not a single dollar reached the Vietnamese victims. In the legal documents, they were described coldly as non-U.S. claimants. One former ranch hand pilot, William Turner, lived out his final years in isolation in Texas. He suffered from skin cancer and liver disease. Before his death, he recorded a message. "I sprayed death over their land, but now death lives inside me. We poisoned them, and we poisoned ourselves." The tape was never released publicly, but in 1988, a scientist read part of it aloud at a conference. The hall fell silent. No one spoke. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows, real rain, colorless, but echoing the orange rain of years past. In Vietnam, centers for Agent Orange victims began to appear. Thousands of children born long after the war carried the same scars. They could not walk. They could not speak. Their eyes stared blankly, as if asking a question no one could answer. Why must we bear the sins of others? The rivers still flowed through poisoned lands, but even the clearest water carried memory, the memory of a sky that once rained poison. Agent Orange had not only killed forests and people, it had killed memory, trust, and the idea of innocence itself. August 2025, 60-plus years later. The soil still bleeds toxins after every rain. Children are still born blind or twisted. The villagers no longer scream. They have learned to live quietly beside the poison, because sometimes Silence is the final form of survival for those who have lost everything. Bin Duong Province, 1998. The monsoon air was heavy, damp, and thick with the scent of wet soil. Near the Jongnai River, rows of water spinach shimmered green beneath the fading light. But beneath the surface, the ground held a secret dioxin levels more than 300 times higher than the safe limit. A woman named Nguyen Thi Bay, 67 years old, worked barefoot in the field, hands submerged in the black mud. Her palms were scarred and pitted, dotted with old burn-like marks. "Still have to live," she muttered. "As long as there's land, there's life." She didn't know, or perhaps she had stopped caring, that this patch of earth had once been a U.S. military washing site for herbicide drums more than 30 years earlier. Leaking barrels had poisoned the soil. Rain carried the toxins into the river. The river fed the crops, the wells, the people. Every drop of water became a whisper of death, silent, slow, and eternal. 2003, the Vietnamese Military Institute of Chemistry, together with Canadian scientists, began testing 28 dioxin hotspots. At Bien Hoa, samples taken from Sen Lake revealed over 1 million parts per trillion of TCDD, the highest concentration ever recorded. Canadian toxicologist Dr. Wayne Dwernichuk wrote in his report, "We are no longer describing remnants of war. This is an intergenerational environmental catastrophe. Every living organism in this zone is a victim." The report was submitted to the United Nations. There was no response. In later conferences, the topic was shelved, labeled as lacking conclusive causal evidence between exposure and hereditary deformities. But in Bien Hoa, evidence was breathing in the children convulsing in their sleep, in the mothers miscarrying again and again, in the veterans dying of liver cancer before 50. At the Quang Tri Center for Agent Orange victims, afternoons were quiet. Rows of children sat on the concrete floor of the courtyard, motionless, their eyes unfocused. Some could not speak. Some could not hear. Some could not move at all. Teacher Tran Thi Luyen, who had worked there for over 20 years, said softly, "Some of them just laugh all day for no reason. I think it's how they fight pain." She stroked the hair of Kai, a 12-year-old boy with a thin frame and milky eyes. He doesn't know who his father was. His mother died giving birth. But tests show he still carries dioxin in his blood. These children, nameless, blameless, had become living extensions of the poisoned soil. Their bodies were the earth made flesh whenever it rained. Luyen led them under the veranda, letting them stretch out their hands to feel the drops. "So they'll know what real rain feels like," she whispered. But deep down, she knew even the real rain still carried traces of the poison. Across the Pacific, in Washington, D.C., 2009. A group of American veterans returned to Vietnam. Among them was Chuck Searcy, now gray-haired, thin, and quiet. They walked through the forests of Aloi, the same forests once sprayed to nothing. No gunfire now, no screams, only the stillness of the soil. Searcy knelt, scooping a handful of black earth. He stared at it for a long time before saying, "We left behind a legacy of guilt, and the worst part is it's still alive." When he returned home, he founded Project Renew, an organization dedicated to clearing unexploded ordnance and decontaminating dioxin sites. The work was slow, painstaking, like untangling the threads of human sin woven into the earth itself. Bien Hoa, 2019. A joint Vietnamese-U.S. remediation project began. Engineers in white suits and respirators stood beside a massive crater where barrels once leaked. Excavators clawed deep into the ground, hauling toxic soil into thermal chambers. At 800 Fahrenheit degrees, The molecular bonds of dioxin began to break fire, consuming what decades could not. A young Vietnamese engineer watched the flames and murmured, "Maybe this is the first time the sky here has truly been clean again." But as the sun set, the air still carried a faint, acrid smell, the ghost of a poison that had slept in the earth for half a century. The world had changed, wars had ended, peace banners hung in conference halls. But in small villages, children were still being born deformed. A third, even fourth generation still carried the invisible inheritance of war. No one could say when it would end. No one dared to say the land or the blood was clean. August 2024, Ho Chi Minh City. At the ceremony marking 63 years since Operation Ranch Hand, American veterans sat beside Vietnamese families who had lost children and land. No anger, no blame, only eyes meeting across the decades, filled with the same quiet understanding. "We are all victims of the same sin," a bell tolled, deep, slow, and heavy, like the echo of a memory refusing to fade. Each strike was a prayer for the souls who never left the souls living in the soil, in the rivers, in the blood, and in the memory of humankind of the day the sky rained poison.